past 2:30, and there's a few folk who want to attend the S training talk, which begins at 3 p.m. our time, 4 p.m. European time. So in order that we can get the maximum sport economics for those who want to attend both talks, we're going to get started. So we're welcome to our 54th Reading Online Sport Economics Seminar. It is a pleasure to have David Boto-Garcia presenting today. His talk is on, I'm desperately trying to find my schedule. Here we go, on managerial beliefs in firm performance, field evidence from professional elite soccer. David, please do feel free to share your slides and take away your presentation. David has about 60 minutes to talk in. And there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A. So if you are able to keep your microphones on mute for the time being, add questions in the chat, and there'll be plenty of time for discussion once David's finished his talk. David, all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, James, for the introduction, and thank you very much, all of you, for being here and for attending this seminar. It's a pleasure for me to present this paper. That is joined with Professors Alessandro Bucciolo and Luca Sarri from the University of Verona. Well, in the recent years, there's an emerging body of literature that has started to examine the contribution and the role of manager characteristics and manager traits on firm performance. And scholars have devoted attention to how their specific background, their specific characteristics matter for explaining results, especially in corporate performance. And in this sense, this paper by Bertrand and Shore in 2003 in Quarterly Journal of Economics was one of the first that related or linked with panel data how distinct managers observed in different firms. With that data set, you can identify their contribution to outcomes. And this way of reasoning has been also followed recently in the sports literature by this Muehlhauser paper in Journal of Sports Economics in 2018, I think. But in general terms, in starting in this managerial literature, following Bertrand, we can find these other works by Malmendier and Bandiera and so on that more or less follow the same lines. And for instance, I think it's Malmendier that says that managers with military experience, for instance, are more aggressive in their decisions. So that it seems that depending on who you decide to be the boss, then maybe you will find different results. So this literature generally find, as I say, person-specific differences in management styles, and empirically the major challenge in some cases is how to identify which specific decisions they are accountable for, because in some settings, especially in finance, you only have annual information, or maybe you make an investment and the results are only materialize after a while. So this low frequency of outcomes limits at the same time learning opportunities and makes it quite complex to properly identify the effect of firm manager characteristics on outcomes. And also in firms you have a hierarchical structure in which many people make different decisions, so it's not clear who is the responsible for the final choices. So our purpose in this paper is to continue in this line of reasoning to analyze the role of manager decisions on firm performance using elite soccer as the field of study. Okay, so we try to translate that rationale to this setting. And why? Because on the one hand, soccer is a high-power incentives industry in which managers have economic incentives, not only in terms of wages and and succeed, and professionals succeed, but also in terms of public recognition and so on. So they have proper incentives to do it in a proper way. They receive high frequency feedback because teams play several matches during the season, and you win, you draw, or you defeat, and based on that you can change your beliefs, you can adapt yourself, make a different decision. So this high frequency feedback helps in the identification of manager decisions. And therefore we have more granular relationship between their decisions and team results or firm results in this context. And also free riding problems are mitigated because, as I say, okay, it's true that we have in soccer a staff of people working for the team, but at the end the manager is the main responsible for all the decisions, because the staff is the people that he chooses to work with him. So at the end, the context is better than in other industries. And in addition to this, as you know better than me, soccer has been used by several people to analyze different behavioral patterns. Okay, so it's in some sense there's this paper in Journal of Economic Perspectives in 2000, I think, that says that soccer is a kind of natural lab. So we try also to follow these lines. Obviously, there's this inherent problem of external validity, because it's true that results in soccer are not directly cannot be directly extrapolated to other settings, but in our view, this is a common problem in all industries. When you use an industry data, maybe it's not you cannot make the same inference for other cases, but okay, this is a classical and unusual problem. And our key variable, the variable in which we pay attention, is managers' perseverance in using a given system of play. Because among many decisions they have to make, they have to decide, given a squad talent, how to organize players in the pitch. Okay, they train during the week, and then they have to decide either to play 4-4-2, 4-3-3, whatever. Okay, and this belongs to their core competences, as we see, because it's their decision how to play. So when they make that decision, they play a match and they either win or lost or whatever. And based on that, in the next match, they have to decide to continue using the same system of play or to change, to adapt. So what we try to see is how their perseverance or their insistence in using their preferred or their system of play translates or not into different outcomes. So, well, I will explain this maybe better later in the paper. So the intuition is to contribute to this emerging literature on the role of beliefs in fair performance, because there's this line of reasoning that says that if you believe in yourselves, if you are confident in your abilities and you perseverate in your core ideas, maybe in the medium term you will succeed, because that helps in building a sense of security and self-confidence. So the idea is to make some contributions in this sense, and obviously on this line of research on what determines success in professional sports, with all this body of literature, I have just written down some examples, but you know there's many examples of similar papers. So to this end, what we do is we use a data set covering 10 seasons from 2009, 2010 to 2018, 2019 from the Italian Serie A. Okay, we focus on this league, and we have a panel data set for 34 teams. Well, let's call them 34 clubs, okay? And only 10 of them are observed in all the periods, because you know some of them are relegated to the second division and some other are promoted, so only 10 are observed in the 10 periods. But this is not an unbalanced panel data set, because you have the same number of teams in each season, although they are not the same. Okay. And we have information for 1,580 matches that are played during the first half of the season. We focus on the first half for several reasons. On the one hand, in December, well, yeah, in January, there's this winter transfer market in which teams can trade players. And this tends to be dependent on previous results. So teams that are not doing well hire new players, and okay, to avoid this sort of potential endogeneity in outcomes and in hirings and so on, we prefer to focus only on the first half. And also, in the last part of the season, we can expect that if some teams have already achieved their objectives, or they are far from achieving their purposes, they have low incentives to perform well. So maybe this introduces some problems in the analysis, and okay, that's the reason why we prefer only to work with the first half of the season. Because at the end, we believe also that to study how manager believes in the system of play and manager's perseverance, maybe the first part of the season is cleaner from other factors, okay? Because you start the season, you get the team, and you have to decide what is your preferred system. And maybe then in the later part, in the last part of the season, you are more influenced by many other dimensions, such as imagine you are playing a European competition or so on. So at the end, the unit of analysis is the performance of team I in match T at season S, okay? Because we have several matches per team within seasons. And because we have 2 teams per match, we have a total of 3,160 observations for the analysis. The data set has been retrieved from different sources. On the one hand, Serie A website for the match-specific information. Also, this Tutto Calciatori website also for players and managers' characteristics. La Gazzetta dello Sport, that provides at the beginning of the season information of players' wages. And this is an additional reason why we only focus on the first half, because we don't have information about the wages of the players that are hired in the winter transfer market. And finally, this other well-known website, Football Data, that apart from other match-specific information, it also provides data on the betting odds. Our dependent variable that we want to explain is an order indicator of performance. Okay, so we define it as an indicator that goes from 0 to 2, depending on whether the team I loses, draws, or wins the corresponding match T. Obviously, this performance is not linear, because it's not the same to win, you get 3 points, than to draw, you only get 1. And that's why we use this order indicator to implicitly recognize this non-linearity. Based on the information we have, we define the starting 11. Okay, so we know how many defenders, midfielders, and forwards start the match, and based on that, we define 2 key variables, or 2 variables of interest for the analysis. One is the risk preferences of the manager. Okay, so we consider the 4-4-2 as the risk neutral formation, okay, the baseline formation, and then we define with dummies the starting formation as risk averse or risk tolerant, depending on whether we see it is more offensive or more defensive than this baseline 4-4-2. In particular, the formation is risk averse if it includes less than 2 forwards or more than 4 defenders, and the formation is labeled risk tolerant if it includes more than 2 forwards or less than 4 defenders. Obviously, this is not easy, because in some cases there are players that can play in the back, in the midfield. In some cases it's not really clear, but to this end we follow the classification in Serie A's website. Okay, so in Serie A's website they say this player is a midfielder, and we follow that conceptualization. And as the second and key variable of interest is this perseverance in using the same tactical structure, and we define it as a dummy that takes value 1 if the same setting, the same initial formation is used as in the previous match. Okay, so in this sense, what we try to capture is the insistence in using the same system, and we will see later that we also model this choice decision. Okay, we don't assume this is exogenous, we allow for this being endogenous with performance, so we will see in a couple of minutes. Here in this slide, I just present some summary statistics of these 3 variables. First, for the whole sample, and we see, okay, we grouped observations between winners and non-winners, and between losers and non-losers. Okay, so draws are classified into each of the categories in each case. And we don't find in this descriptive evidence differences in perseverance or risk preferences between winners and non-winners, but apparently losers are associated with greater risk aversion. Okay, so if you are more risk averse, there are more proportion of lost matches. And also, although it is at 10% significance level, perseverance is more associated with non-losing the match. Okay, so this is just merely descriptive. Then we split the sample into weak and top teams, and we made this distinction based on the median wage. Okay, so we have team wages, we have the distribution in the sample. Obviously, the wages are price adjusted, okay, they're expressed in real terms, and we take the median and we classify teams as weak or top, depending on being below or above the median. And we see that this the relationship between perseverance and losing or non-losing the team is only holds for weak teams. That is, if you are a weak team, being perseverant is greater among non-losers, but this is not the case for top teams. And as for risk aversion, there's greater proportion of risk aversion in lost matches for the case of top teams than for the case of weak teams. So, okay, here this is significant at 10% level, but okay, it seems that the effect is at least stronger in this case. So just this is merely an exploratory analysis. But obviously there are many other factors operating here. There are many other dimensions that we need to control. So that's why we now proceed to introduce several control variables to properly study this. As match-specific characteristics, we control for whether the match is played at home, in line with all this literature on referee bias and the role of fans' pressure on team performance. We control for ex-ante favoritism, and we compute the pre-match winning probabilities as the inverse of the betting odds. And in this way, we do not only control for the quality balance between contenders, but also for other dimensions like injuries, sanctions, and fatigue, and whatever. So we assume if betting markets are efficient, they contain or they capture, bettors capture all this public information, and therefore these ex-ante winning probabilities capture the contextual factors that affect the match outcome. And also they can also take into account these benchmark effects that Bartling et al. In management science documented. They say that when playing, the favoritism may hurt you in a sense because you are more pressed to do it well. So in this sense, this favoritism is in either direction, but this favoritism is controlled for. Another issue is how unexpected prior outcomes affect performance, because maybe if you have beaten a top team and it was an unexpected result, that raises your team spirit, your cohesiveness, your beliefs in what you are doing. So maybe this could have a positive effect in the following matches because, as I say, you are more confident in yourself. So, and in the same spirit, if you have lost a match in which you were clearly favored and it was like a surprise, maybe this creates some problems within team players and maybe problems inside the squad. So we also control for this. And this variable is defined as having won or having lost a match in which you were either clearly favored or either clearly non-favored. Okay, so based on the betting odds probabilities in the previous match, we can define like a favorite and an underdog if the probabilities are below or above the other drawing and losing probabilities. I am not explaining clearly, I think, but focusing on an unexpected previous win, this is you have won the match, and in that match the winning probability you have was lower than the drawing probability and lower than the losing probability. Okay, so that's the point. And then we have the lack of the goal difference, because this variable captures not only the final result. If you won the match, this is positive. If you lost the match, this is negative, but also the magnitude of the win or the defeat. So in this sense, having won a match by 4-0, it seems that raises your spirit in a better way than just having won it by 1-0. So we try to capture this with this variable. We also consider several manager characteristics like his age, his experience in Serie A, in terms of years, his nationality, whether he is Italian or not, in this case, whether he's new in the team, it is the first season that the manager trains the team, and also a dummy for whether the manager is different from the one that started the season. Okay, replacements in the manager, we also control for that. And also the team composition characteristics. Okay, we have information of the starting 11, so we control for the average age, the share of foreign players in the starting 11, the share of new players, the average number of years in Serie A, and also the wages, the mean wages in logs, to proxy, in a sense, the quality of the starting 11, because obviously we assume that starting 11s that earn greater salaries is because they are greater players, and therefore it's more likely for them to win. Here I just present some summary statistics of this data. I have to say that for this perseverance variable, okay, we miss some observations because this variable is computed based on the previous match, and about half of the observations start with the same tactical structure as in the previous match. Okay, so that's the share of perseverance in the sample. About 34% start with risk-tolerant formations, and 32% start with risk-averse formations. And this is the model to be estimated. We regress the order indicator of performance on this perseverance treatment dummy, the risk variables referring to whether it is averse or tolerant, a set of match characteristics that are the ones that I introduced before, whether playing at home and the betting, the favoritism and so on, the manager controls, the team player characteristics, and a set of team individual effects that are treated as random effects, plus the classical error term. And as I mentioned before, this perseverance variable is a choice decision, because it's a decision of the manager to use or not the same tactical structure. So we jointly model this variable together with performance. So this is like a recursive system. And this perseverance variable is explained by match-specific circumstances, because if you play at home or if you are a favorite for the match or not, this might affect your decision to stick to the same formation, manager characteristics and manager controls, and a set of exclusion restrictions for identification, plus also some team individual effects. The intuition here is that maybe imagine for Barcelona usually or historically play 4-3-3, or Villarreal play 4-4-2. So we try to capture team effects, club effects in the perseverance in using the same system. Plus, obviously, this error term, and these two error terms are assumed to be correlated. So this is a panel order probed with endogenous variable with random effects. These exclusion restrictions, this vector contains two variables. First, we consider the difference in absolute value in the winning probabilities between that match and the previous match. Okay, the intuition here is that imagine that you play against a team that is similar to you, okay, and you use your preferred starting formation. And then in the next match, you face either a really weak team or either a really top team. And maybe the change in the quality of your contender might induce you to change, to adapt, either to be more offensive or either to be more defensive or whatever. So we assume or we hypothesize that this perseverance decision depends on the change or the relative change in favoritism. And also, we consider the number of shoots on target in the previous match, because maybe the decision to stick or not, or to switch to another formation, conditional on the final outcome, that is controlled here in this X, depends on how well the team played. Okay, so if the team played well and created many scoring opportunities, independently on the outcome or the final outcome, maybe induces the manager to stick or to continue using the same system. So these are the two exclusion restrictions that we test whether they compile with exogeneity requirements, because we assume that they only affect perseverance, but they do not affect performance conditional on the other controls. As I mentioned, we consider team individual effects, but we treat, for instance, Juventus 2010 as a different team from Juventus 2012, for instance. Okay, so each team season is a different team. But at the same time, Juventus 2010 and Juventus 2012 are the same club. So to take into account that observations from this same club but in different seasons are the same, or not the same, but may share some common factors like the owner, the fan base, whatever, we cluster the standard errors at this club level, better than team club level. So now I present the estimation results. For simplicity, I only focus on the average marginal effects. And first, I present the results for the perseverance equation and then for the outcome equation. And for the perseverance equation, we find that the decision to continue using the same system is positively associated with an unexpected win, but it is, okay, only at 10% level, but is negatively associated with an unexpected defeat. And this makes sense, but if we take 95 confidence level as the threshold, it seems that there's like an asymmetric belief updating here, because you continue using the same system in case that you receive good news, that is an unexpected win, but you do not significantly change your start information in the presence of bad news. So here we more or less document this sort of asymmetric effects depending on unexpected results. We also see that this perseverance is positively associated with the lack of the goal difference, which makes sense. If you had a good result, stick with that and continue using, do not change if things are going well. Manager characteristics do not seem to play a relevant role, surprisingly, except for new managers in the team. It seems that new managers in the team are more likely to continue using the same system, okay? And as for the exclusion restrictions, both are significant and have the expected signs. When there's an increase in absolute value in the winning probabilities relative to the previous match, so that you become either more favorite or either less favorite than before, it's less likely that you perseverate in using the same system. And also when conditional on everything else, when you created many scoring opportunities, the likelihood of continuing using the same formation is also larger. Moving to the outcome equation, we find, okay, we present the average marginal effects for the three possible outcomes, and as you can see, more or less, the ones for the win are really similar to the ones for the defeat, so I just focus on this last column. And we find that perseverance is positively associated with a significant greater winning probability, okay? So that teams that use the same start information that in the previous match are more likely to win, everything else being equal. And this could be explained by the fact that maybe players require some time to adapt to the specific routines or the specific requirements of a given system, because if it's not the same if you play with 3 in the back or if you play with 5 or whatever. So maybe those who are perseverant in using the same system might then get better results because of this like sort of learning effect. As for the risk preferences of the formation, being risk tolerant is positively associated with the probability of winning, but risk aversion is not, at least at 95 confidence level. In line with previous findings, playing at home conveys an advantage. Favorite teams are more likely to win as expected. And as for manager characteristics, it's interesting to note that experience emerges as a really important factor. Okay, this could be an expected finding. Those managers with greater experience at the competition are more likely to win. And also, in line with expectations, better quality teams are more likely to win. But the other factors, unexpected prior outcomes and the other manager characteristics are not found to be significant. Subsequently, what we did is to split the sample into two based on these weak teams, top teams, depending on their quality, okay, to see whether results are different across these two subsamples. And what we find is for the weak team subsample, non-perseverance, non-risk preferences are significantly associated with the winning probability. Okay, so contrary to the whole sample, in this subsample, these variables are not statistically significant. And I also highlight here that unexpected wins are negatively associated with winning probabilities for this subsample, maybe because they get so self-confident or overconfident. Maybe they in this case, they win a match, they were not favorite, and then in the following match, they get a bad result because it was just a matter of luck. And for the perseverance decision among weak teams, the difference in winning probabilities is here the key factor. So it seems that managers in weak teams are heavily affected by the balance in by how the winning probability changes between matches. For the case of top teams, we still find that both risk tolerance and perseverance are positively associated with winning probabilities. Okay, so it seems that these factors matter for explaining performance, especially or only for this subsample. And also the other factors are playing at home and favoritism are also in line with expectations. After that, we try to explore potential underlying mechanisms of our findings. One of them is that, as I mentioned before in the whole sample, managers that were new in the team were significantly more perseverant in the same system. So we explore whether there's like managerial resistance to change, that if I am new in the team, I stick to the same system just not I am not familiar with the players or with the possibilities of playing that we could have, so I am more likely to use the same system, and maybe this is driven part of our findings. So what we did is to include the number of matches that the manager has been in charge of the team. Okay, so like a count indicator that measures the the experience of the manager, not only with the team or with the squad, but also with the club, with the philosophy and so on. But this variable is not significant, okay, so that in none of the equation, the number of matches does not significantly affect performance and is not associated with greater perseverance. Another channel or another issue is whether perseverance stems as a learning effect, that by which in the first matches I just trial and error and try with different formations, and then once I receive some feedback about the suitability of the different formations, I finally stick to one. For instance, I try 4-3-3, 4-4-2, 4-5-1, and then after 4 or 5 matches, I stick to one of them. So to explore this in exploratorily, or I don't know how to say, we explore the time pattern in this perseverance variable, okay? Because we see whether it's more likely to be perseverant in the last matches of our sample than in the first matches of our sample, obviously within the first half of the season. But an ANOVA test does not reject the null of stability. So it seems that there's no change in the time pattern of perseverance within seasons. Apart from this, we also conducted a panel order endogenous switching regression, in which the intuition is that we run separate regressions depending on whether you are perseverant or not. And we consider here the match count. This match count is not the number of matches the manager is in charge of the team. This just measure the match count, the match count of the season. If you are in week 1, 2, 3, or whatever. And the intuition for this is to see if, for instance, the effects of perseverance on outcomes change throughout the season, okay? That maybe like an interaction term, something like that. And this variable is neither significant in none of the two equations, because we consider it both in the endogenous equation and in the outcome one. Is not significant, so it seems that apparently this perseverance is not driven by a learning effect. We also conducted a stepwise estimation to see whether the perseverance effect was stable across different model specifications, and we sequentially introduced the different controls to see whether we document, for instance, when we introduce one control, a switch or a shift in one of the coefficients, and this was not the case. The parameters were heavily stable once we introduced the different controls, and also the variance of the random effects decreases as we add controls. Okay, this is expected but more or less this check indicates us that our controls are doing a good job at capturing part of the variability of the performance indicator, and that in principle the perseverance effect is stable. We also consider the number of the points per match and the goal difference as alternative dependent variables to see whether, rather than using this order indicator of performance, what happens if we also consider other outcomes. And we use for this OLS and linear regressions, and our findings are consistent with this. The more or less the magnitude and the significance of the variables are similar. And maybe because the model is highly nonlinear and it's a recursive system and so on, okay, maybe there could be an identification problem or something like that. So we also ran pooled regressions without random effects, regressions treating perseverance as exogenous, just not to infer any causality, but just to be the associations and something like and this sort of analysis, and all of them provide consistent results, or at least results in the same direction. So apparently, it seems that our findings are quite stable or quite robust. So as a summary or concluding remarks from the paper, we document that managers' perseverance in using a given system of play is positively associated with better performance. It seems that there's like an asymmetric belief updating when in managers' decision when they receive information, because they are more likely to stick to the same system when there's an unexpected win, but they do not significantly change the system at 95 confidence level when they have bad news in the form of an unexpected defeat. And also there are important differences by team quality, because perseverance, it seems that matters only for top teams. The same can be said for risk tolerance. So maybe the higher the quality, the greater the probability of translating risky formations into better outcomes, maybe because it's better or it's easier to play with three in the back if the three defenders are really, really good. So you assume some risks, but those risks do not penalize you as if you play using the same formation with a weak team. Also, it seems that weak teams are more likely to switch the system when there's an important change in favoritism from one match to the following. So they are like more adaptive to match circumstances than top teams that maybe stick to a system and play with their system no matter the opponent. And also managers' experience in the competition emerge as an important factor, consistent with other previous studies. Maybe they know better the competition, the rules. Okay, the rules are publicly known, but I mean the non-written rules, the timing, and okay. So maybe experience is a important dimension. And as a final takeaway or main issue from the paper is that managers matter. Managers are really, really important for explaining firm outcomes, and they seem to be subject to some biases. We more or less document some sort of self-attribution bias, because, as I say, they are more perseverant in using the same system in the face of good news. Like, okay, we got an unexpected result, but this is because, okay, I am really good and my formation works. But then when I get an unexpected result, maybe it's because of bad luck or whatever, and I stick to the same formation. Obviously, these are just preliminary results, and I think this is a moment to discuss all this and to receive any feedback to improve this discussion, because the paper is just a working paper. So okay, I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would highly appreciate any comments or suggestions to improve the work.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Really, really interesting talk, thorough analysis of a very interesting data set. If anybody has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we can start the Q&A. I find your work really interesting, David, because I speak from my own personal experience of my own team, but they changed from a manager who I think was very flexible, very attacking, very bold, to a manager who was much more kind of regulation in his structure and perhaps more perseverant midway through the season. And what was interesting was that the players didn't really seem to adapt. The coach wanted them to be more, less moaning about bad luck and things like that. But they still do all the same kinds of things that they were doing under the previous manager. So I guess what I wonder there, if there's any question there, is the extent to which the personnel and the team, you're able to take account of that in the analysis that you've carried out.
What do you mean with the person in the team, you mean?
I mean, the players themselves, because obviously, a new manager will want to come in and have his own players, but a new manager comes in this case, mid-season, and he has all his older players from the old manager. Is he able to then impose his system, his or her system, in that situation?
Yeah, this is another problem, and as you say, because maybe the original manager makes the hiring decision for playing 4-4-2, then you arrive, you have your philosophy, and you say it's impossible to play my system with these players. But this is our idea of, okay, like you have your ideas, you perseverate, but maybe you are flexible and you adapt if you receive feedback that the system does not work. And that's the intuition. But obviously, we are missing many factors in our modeling because, it depends also on the character of the players and the polyvalence, I don't know how to say, of players, because this is another problem. I mentioned we classify them as defender, midfielder, whatever. But maybe one player can play in 3, 4, 5 positions. And this makes the possibilities much wider, and even though you start with a 4-4-2, for instance, you can adapt within the match. There are many factors. Unfortunately, we cannot control for.
Yep, thanks, David. I was just filling a gap while some hands popped up. Peter has a question.
Thank you, David. That was really interesting. Just a couple of things. One of the immediate thoughts I had is obviously you're making decisions about the team formation at the start of the match. And I think, as you just mentioned in your comments to James just then, was that things change within the match setting. So obviously players are substituted, new players come in, but also formations change, and they might change for many reasons. You might go a goal behind, you might go a goal in front, so you either become more offensive or more defensive. You might receive a red card. So there are lots of kind of within game things which will complicate this kind of notion that you're kind of sticking with this formation at the start, in terms of then comparing the formation at the start of one game and then comparing that to the formation at the start of the next game, without controlling for the fact that things might have changed from one, within a game setting. So, and I know that complicates things massively, but I'm wondering whether you could, as a kind of first run, split the match up into two, so like your first half and the second half, and whether there are obvious strategic changes you can kind of pick up on rather than doing it on a kind of continuous basis. Use kind of half time as a kind of discrete interval. Maybe that's worth something to consider. So I just want to know what your thoughts were on that. And then the second question I had, so there's an element in which some of your control variables are potentially highly correlated, because you've got betting odds in there. So to what extent then does betting odds already capture home bias? To what extent does it already capture team quality, which are obviously you're trying to control for separately? So again, just a couple of things in relation to your choice of controls there. I'm not sure there's actually a question there, James. It just made me comments, and obviously what your thoughts were in terms of both of those comments I made.
Yeah, thank you very much for the comments. I totally agree with you. This is one of the main limitations of the analysis. We ignore what happens within. It's true that you can only do 3 substitutions at least before the pandemic. I mean, so maybe the the changes are only are introduced in the game maybe, and their contribution is not relevant. Well, not as the initial formation, and maybe, but in any case, this is a problem, and in this sense, the paper by Bartling does precisely this: the contribution of, I think, substitutes in the game. Another possibility could be to focus on the first half outcomes. Like, imagine that you only see the matches as the first half as you propose. The problem is that maybe imagine some teams that are fine if you arrive nail at the break. They are satisfied because they expect to win the match in the second half. So this creates some problems. And also another problem with the break is that maybe in the meantime, the manager gives some new instructions, the new intuitions to the players that improves the performance of the team. So there are many within match factors that we ignore, and that would improve much the content of the paper. We will have important discussions on this, and we made some trials introducing some information about the substitutes, but we didn't find results that satisfied us. And as for the second point, apart from these traditional variance inflection factors and so on, that's why we did this stepwise regression, and we started like perseverance and betting odds, perseverance, betting odds, and whatever, perseverance, betting odds, and whatever, to see that if there's like latent correlation between the variables, that would maybe affect suddenly the standard errors and so on. And we did not find any pattern that, so I think they should be correlated, and they should be, but maybe the betting odds capture so many dimensions that the contribution of playing at home is a minor aspect of the winning probability. It's just an idea, but I totally acknowledge that we have many limitations.
Okay, thanks, Devin. Thanks, Peter. Any more questions and comments? Stefan, just beat Peter to a second question.
Oh, sorry, Peter. You're welcome to go ahead if you'd rather. Hi, David. Yeah, very interesting, and these sort of micro analysis of managerial decisions is a really interesting subject. I have a couple of things. So one is just a general thing about the notion of managers, and you mentioned the Bertrand and Shaw literature and the general literature on managerial decision making. I do think it's worth making the point that football managers are very different from the kinds of managers we're talking about in that literature. So, you're talking about, in the managerial literature generally, you're talking about CEOs, the people who have a legal responsibility to protect the best interests of the shareholders. They have a fiduciary duty. They are the highest level decision makers in the business. That's just not true of football managers. They are by no means the highest level managers. The board of directors are in control, and football managers are they're in general terms, they're what we call middle managers, maybe HR managers. But I mean, I think it's really interesting that it's hard to find even they don't even get onto the board of directors and that's kind of interesting. An HR director, the HR director of a company would typically be on the board. Not true in football. So their status is in some ways wildly exaggerated, which I think has always been to the benefit of the true directors of the company. I mean, this is partly the role. The lionization of the manager is a blame diverting tactic on the part of owners of clubs, because they want the managers to take the blame when things go wrong, not themselves. So that's just a sort of point of emphasis. The more specific point on the formations. I mean, one of the things about these formations, and I think we've all read Jonathan, what's it, a book on the formations and so forth. I personally find it very confusing, which shows that I don't really understand how these games are played anyway. But there is a sense in which the whole concept of these formations is a little bit fluid, ambiguous. I mean, what is 4-4-2 to one person might mean something else to a different person. And indeed, one of the things one worry is that these things might actually be messages being sent to the rival coach rather than anything real about the way the game is played. And one thing that strikes me that is actually directly quantifiable, which you could look at here, is the frequency with which managers change personnel on the team. It's something I looked at a little bit in terms of the Premier League. So, for example, I counted that on an average in the Premier League, a team will change its lineup for a Premier League game, with the 38 games in the season. There will be something like 200 to 300 changes in a season, which is a lot, right? I mean, so that's now. I mean, some of those changes are due to injuries, some of them are due to rotation because of other competitions and so forth. But clearly managers are making a lot of, each one of those is clearly a decision. You're dropped this week, or you're playing this week. And in some ways, perhaps that would be the willingness of managers to change their lineup in response to results might be a more objective way to quantify the kinds of strategies that you're trying to identify.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, for the comments. I totally agree with the point, and this is something that the referee reports that we have already received more or less say that, okay, football managers are different from ZEOs. And maybe, okay, the similarity in a sense could be established, but in other sense, as you mentioned, maybe the CEOs of football are the executive board, not the managers. The point here is that, in principle, they are responsible for the sport outcome. That's more or less the intuition. But I know it's not the same, because if you have a really bad squad, for instance, you cannot make the final results. You cannot achieve them. And also,
Arsenal manager.
and you are totally right. You can play a 4-4-2, and there could be, with wings, with 4 central midfielders, with offensive midfielders or defensive midfielders, is like really, really complicated. And also what you say, maybe imagine I am Guardiola, I play my 4-3-3 system, but rivals study me and look at my movements or make some scouting, and I have to change, maybe even though I don't want to, because if I use the same and play exactly the same, the opposite defends me in a good way. And this is something that is beyond our analysis, and we do not control. And the lineup is another point. We consider this option of using the same 11 men, not the same formation, but the same 11 men. The problem is that this is highly affected by injuries and rotations and many other factors that we cannot ascertain if they are a decision or a forced decision, because the player is whatever. So in general terms, I appreciate your comments, all of them. I agree with them, and we have many, unfortunately, many limitations in our work, and maybe we have to revise our wording or our what we say, what we conclude. This is a seminar, and okay, maybe I said some things that are not true, but obviously when you write down things, you have to be really, really accurate.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, David. I think I'm not sure whether football managers are HR managers. I think they're certainly middle managers. And as a current head of department, I wonder what the similarities are between being a head of department and being a football manager. I think one crucial difference is that no matter how badly you do the head of department job, they still ask you to do it again. whereas that's not true with being a football manager. So, Peter, you had follow-up question to ask.
It's very similar to what Stefan just asked about the team formation. I'm equally perplexed by team formation. So a 5-3-2 versus a 3-5-2. I don't really get, because you could have two defensive midfielders in that 3-5-2 setup, which is effectively a 5-3-2 again. So I don't really get the difference. And I actually agree with Stefan in the sense that it could be a signal to the opposition. Well, actually, we're claiming we're going to be playing this formation when actually we're not. And maybe you could look at it from the point of view of how many forwards are on the field, rather than, because a 5-3-2 and a 3-5-2 has the same number of, at least notionally, defensive and midfielders. So if you then broke that up and said, well, look, if somebody's playing a 4-3-3, that, even though I'm not going against what I just said, but I'm still not convinced that maybe the formation they're actually playing, but maybe that's more attack-minded than a 5-3-2 or a 3-5-2, perhaps. Again, there's debates to be had there.
David, do you want to respond to that? Johan has a question as well.
Yeah, just adding on to Peter's comment there, just as something to think about, perhaps looking at heat maps or something, like overall heat maps that might give you a better idea. For example, if they're shifting 10 yards further forward as an average team rather than being 10 yards further back, that might capture some of the things that Peter was talking about.
Yeah. The use of heat maps and this highly detailed Opta data is the future, I think, and there are really wonderful people working on that direction. But the problem is, in some cases, it's not easy to access this data. You have to pay, or you have to. And we looked for ways of improving that, heat maps or something, but we could not access that sort of information to do a better job.
Yeah, I mean, I think things like, because you can get some sense of the shape of the formation from Opta style data, that's for sure. I think you're right. That's the ideal. Any more questions that people have? Darius.
Yeah, thank you, David. My question is, do you think that coaches with experience as professional football players make better decisions as coaches? Did you take that into consideration in your research?
There's some literature on soccer efficiency, I think, and we have here some people that have published papers on that I think they have considered whether the manager has been a player before, and I'm not really sure, but I think they found, as you say, that they tend to be better because maybe they know the internal, I don't know, other dimensions, look like Zidane, Guardiola, all these people that have been players. And yeah, it's something that maybe we should add as a control in the same spirit of nationality and age and all of this. Maybe it's an important variable to include. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darius. Yeah, I was intrigued by the results that you showed, David, about the stronger teams being more persistent or more perseverant, as you say, but the weaker teams being less perseverant. And I wondered about the extent to which, if you are a team that's at the top and then you're hit by something, so say Liverpool last season when they suddenly began losing games, I guess the better teams change things quickly and get back to the top perhaps, and then the teams that you observe as being weaker are weaker because they've fallen away from the top? I don't know if to what extent there's some kind of interaction going on there in terms of, if things are going fine, you don't have to change them because you're winning games. But then when you stop winning games, maybe you have to start changing things then.
Yeah, maybe like considering your state of form or something like that. Imagine your performance in the last 5 matches or something like that. We tried, but we have the problem that we lose many observations. Maybe what we could do is to take the whole season, and maybe with the whole season we can like have a moving average of 5 matches or something like that to see how this translates in future outcomes.
Yeah. Any more questions and comments? Okay, well, we shall then take the opportunity to wrap up and say again, thank you, David, for a really interesting talk on football tactics, formation, strategies, perseverance. Really interesting. Thank you again for taking the time for presenting. We will return next week, May the 28th, with Dave Berry of Southern Utah University, presenting stereotypes and hiring decisions, lessons from the NBA draft. So I wish you all a happy and safe weekend, and look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
Bye.